Welcome back to Marcelian Online, and let me ask you a simple question. Do you like Season 2 of Mythic Plus? There are more specs than ever viable to do keys with, and no, this is not edited by us, but an actual tier list from aggregated data, free for everyone to see. The numbers show why this is the best season so far, and there are a bunch of reasons as to why, so let's have a little chat. Let's talk about numbers first. A Redditor that goes by Zmeeser posted some really cool and interesting graphs that showcase the evolution of the players clearing keys and what the drop-off is. Two main things that you need to understand. One would be that there is always drop-off. There never really is a season of WoW, no matter what expansion, where people don't stop playing after a few weeks. That's normal. Most players come in at a patch's release, check it out, do the content, then go to other games. That's okay and expected. The second thing is that Season 2 of The War Within is following the atrocious Season 1, which could be considered the worst Mythic Plus season ever made, so a reasonable expectation would be that skepticism and cynicism is at an all-time high for players that would like to play Mythic Plus, and for good reason. Granted, Marcelian and myself, together with other content creators, have done our best to be fair critics of Season 2, and we pointed out multiple times this is shaping up to be one of the best seasons so far, hoping to steer the community perception into a more open-minded and eager-to-play direction. And this season currently is the best we've ever had, if we look at the specific graph right here, with one exception, which is the Season 4 of Dragonflight, that doesn't contradict this part, and I'll tell you why. What you see on your screen is basically the drop-off rate in keys each week. The War Within Season 2 has almost the best week 3 out of all of the last 6 seasons with the smallest drop-off rate. Of course, with the exception of Season 4 of Dragonflight. If we put these two in the same boat, then we have to mention that Season 4 of Dragonflight followed the, by then, best season of Mythic Plus ever made. Not the worst one that we have now. And if we presume that the current player base have their skepticism and cynicism at an all-time high, we have to assume it was the opposite for Season 4 of Dragonflight. On top of that, Season 4 of Dragonflight was the awakened or faded season of the expansion, again following the previous faded season in Shadowlands that was massively successful for an expansion pronounced dead. So you could be fair in saying that Season 4 of Dragonflight had all of the right things going for it, yet we know what ended up happening in the end, which we can clearly see how all of that goodwill dropped in the biggest drop-off ever by week 4. This definitely doesn't look like it's happening now, since this data has the first 3 weeks of Season 2 from The War Within, yet we are now in week 4 with no signs of slowing down outside the regular people slowly stopping, and I will tell you why the drop-off will continue to be small, at least for a few more weeks, keeping the season as one of the highest player retention seasons so far. These are just fancy spangled words, but what do they mean to you? Well, the sheer reason as to why the season is so good will 100% be something you want to know. First, let's take a look at class balance, with an emphasis on overall performance and representation. If we go to archon.gg, we can see a tier list being made with the average performance of the top key pushers of each spec. This is what you saw earlier in the video, and it looks pretty cool, right? All but 2 specs are S tier, with survival and augmentation struggling behind. Does this mean all of these are meta? Well, technically, from the gaming definition of meta, yes. That would mean all of these are meta in what these analyses consider push keys, aka keys above 15, if we scroll further down to see where these numbers are being pulled from. Of course, if we filter by just what the website considers high keys, the representation is a bit more spread out, and that's because the website looks at the minimum and maximum keys done, which for augmentation means a 10 and a 15, while some specs go all the way up to plus 17. Now, this is a good example of what tier lists mean, ours or other people's, and why it's impossible to have one tier list that showcases all of the information you want, which is why in ours, at the very least, we go into the data we used and the reasons we have for ranking the specs the way that we do, just for your information. To give you more concrete proof that this season has vastly improved spec diversity, I made a graph of our own with the distribution of specs in +10 keys, comparing the current season with Season 1 of The War Within. Augmentation being dead probably doesn't upset a lot of people, and if anything, it might make a lot more people happy to actually play the season, considering that one of their desired spec in the party hasn't been already decided by augmentation, as with every other season in the past, I don't know, 4, 5 so far. But overall, you don't need to be a professional analyst to see that more specs clear +10s in general, and this is just week 3. As the season progresses, even more and more keys will be done by all of the specs as well as augmentation evokers. I chose to look at +10 since that's where the eye level rewards are capped and what the majority of key pushers do anyway, since 10s are by far the most popular key level. All of this happened and hopefully will continue to happen because of the constant spec balance and, whether we like to admit it or not, the boring tier sets. Yes, the fact that the tier sets are so bland and so homogeneous means they are easier to tune against each other for a smoother class balance. At least that's the implication. I hope that's true. If you didn't know, for instance, Enhancement Shaman, a premier spec last season that was kicking 99% of the DPS players out of their groups, had an insane tier set bonus, possibly the strongest by far for every other spec in the game, while now it's more in line with everyone else's. This does indeed make the game more boring, but you can hardly have balance without a level of blandness, which will fight against community discrimination for underperforming specs. The Giga Balance patch we just had last week also helps keep specs close to each other, considering we had 27 out of the 39 specs being addressed by small incremental numbers instead of Giga nerf and buff hammers that would swing the meta from side to side. If we will keep considering +10s as the basis for comparing spec performance, popularity and balance for people, the fact that the dungeons have been nerfed many times over and generally designed with a different philosophy in mind than last season has contributed to way more people actually playing the game. I mean, we can go back to the previous graph where the number of parses you see or keys being completed here are taken straight from Warcraft logs, and we can clearly notice that the sheer number of keys done this season is several times higher than Season 1. The nerfs helped, but buffing tanks and healers was also very welcome. On top of this, we just have way fewer casters to deal with, fewer overall mechanics to pay attention to and handle, giving players an easier time to actually play their class and the dungeon in general. And the most important part of all of this is the fact that most, if not all, of these changes were requested or feedback by the players one way or another. I'm not going to sit here and say that the devs are listening to everything we say or will make any changes we want in the future, but at the risk of sounding like a broken record, they are actually paying attention to the community. We received almost all of the changes that the majority of the community has been asking for, and this is just yet another proof that not only did the mentality of the WoW team change in the way that they view community feedback, but WoW is definitely going into a better direction. Some people can actually see and appreciate the changes, which ironically was the main reaction we saw in the comments of our previous video, where we proposed changes for Mythic Plus in a direction that was vastly disagreed with. This, to the detriment of our own content, shows that people really love this season in particular. Also, let the record show that Marcelian&Flame doesn't live in its own bubble or not listen to its own community. The main purpose of this video is to provide perspective to people on a few levels. The first would be for people considering and not decided on whether or not to play WoW this season, specifically for people interested in Mythic Plus. And if the data presented so far doesn't answer that question, then I don't know anymore, man. Second, players still debating on playing meta or off-meta specs. Meta will always be a thing, and people will always prioritize meta specs, but showcasing the balance and variety in spec representation in Mythic Plus should at least let people know it's okay to invite non-meta folk. And lastly, Marcelian&Flame believes that criticism is warranted whenever it is fair, but also praise where it is due, and the WoW team has been working on making WoW better since patch 9.15. And as long as we will debate their questionable choices with stuff like tanks and healer nerfs, we will also acknowledge when they are open-minded and listen to player feedback, as long as they make the game fun, which we believe it is. and which we believe they did. And speaking of tanks and healers, you might be surprised at the actual balance for them this season, which we have a video on right here. Without spoiling it too much, it's looking really good this season, which I guess is another reason why Season 2 of Mythic Plus just hits different this